Over the course of many years, we have had multiple conversations about parking in the downtown core. And those of us that have served with the Transportation Commission over the years in our various capacities have experienced a lot of that. The big years were back in 2007 through 2009 when they spent about 2 years, and the council spent, I think, about 6 months deliberating about what to do with downtown parking. So I want to give you just a little bit of history on some of what's happened over the years because a lot of the council members were not here at that time. So I want to give you just a quick background on that. And then we'll talk specifically about a proposed change that has been requested of the city as it relates to the overnight parking restriction area and modifying that boundary to the north. So this is the current map that's approved by the council that shows the parking overlays within the downtown core. So to help orient, again, Main Street here running left and right, north is to the left. There are a variety of different colored lines and dashed lines and solid lines on here that represent different regulations within the downtown central business district and the nearby environs. First off, the solid red lines that you see here up along the highway, North Main Street, those are the no parking zones, so 24/7, 365, no parking outright. That's primarily along the highway itself, portions of 6th Street, portions of 3rd Street, a little bit of A. Then the 3-hour parking zone is this kind of dashed orange line that wanders through here. Okay, goes down around Gritman, and then kind of just pretty much right around the couplet, but not quite as far north and south as the extent of the couplet. Generally, the heart of the central business district, 3-hour parking restriction. That was one of the big issues discussed back in 2009. Do we change that to 45 minutes, an hour, 90 minutes, leave it at 3 hours, make it meter parking, whatever. In the end, the council chose not to change any of that, so it's 3 hours, and it has been that ever since. So that's in that kind of that core section. The next one you see is the green. Well, let me skip to the purple first. So this purple dash line represents where we have an overnight parking restriction. So between the hours of 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., there's no parking allowed there.
Is that now, Les, you're talking about?
This is current. This is what's in place today and has been for a few years. That used to be a 2 a.m. to 7 a.m., but in 2009 we updated it to 3 to 6 to shorten that time frame because we had early business that was happening and that 7 a.m. was getting in the way. So within that zone, so that dashed purple line, that is the area where you cannot park overnight, and the reason for that is in the central business district we're trying to provide a higher level of service for street cleanliness, for removing of trash and debris and dirt and all those kind of things, but also for snow removal, because there's a pretty good operation that goes on when you're trying to take snow out of a downtown core and not just pile it up in the parking in front of all the businesses. So we have nighttime operations, removing berms and just general plowing and de-icing and all those kind of things that are at a higher level within this area of the community, and thus the need for the 3-hour or for the overnight restriction. Okay. Now, back in 2009, we also recognized through those discussions that there were businesses downtown and residences downtown that have a need for overnight parking. So particularly the bars and the nightclubs that have patrons that come in and drink the alcohol or whatever they may do, we don't want them on the street. We don't want them driving home. And so where do they park their cars? So the council at that time felt that that needed to be addressed. We also recognized that there are a lot of residents downtown in those upstairs, second, third story level apartments all through the downtown core, more than people probably realize. So at that time in 2009, the council said, hey, we need to probably recognize that and do some things to allow some overnight parking on select locations. Well, that's where the green is, okay? To allow places for those cars to be parked for residents and those folks that shouldn't be driving. So that's what's in place today. Now, we're going to be talking a little bit about this location because the requests that we have received from 4 or 5 different applicants is to modify this overnight parking restriction to include this area here to the north. And I'm going to run you through a couple of maps real quick that just kind of show you the progression. And part of the reason this, I want you to understand that it's somewhat of a fluid process. And the council has, over the years, made changes based on the conditions that were in place at the time. And that's something that I think is important as we look at this particular one, because some conditions have changed. All right, so going back, not to the very beginning, but just far enough, 1981, this is back in the era just before the main couplet was being constructed, and we were starting to move traffic off of Main Street and put it into the couplet area. That was right in this 81, 82 time frame. So this was the map adopted back at that time. We had in the yellow the 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. overnight restriction. You can see it goes a long ways to the north because Main Street was the highway at that time. And so that was how they took care of it. We put the 3-hour parking limitation in place, and that was about it, right? That's what we had. The little blue star here represents the location, the block we're talking about tonight. And that'll show up here as we go through. So you can see how it's gone in and out of the regulated parking overlays. 1983, so a couple years later, now it's in. We've included it in the overnight 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. restriction. So we've expanded to the north, made a few other changes here and there. I think we added a little bit further off to the west on 3rd and 6th Street. And then in 2009, after the parking wars, as we like to refer to it, we were looking at these types of scenarios where we had, again, in green, that overnight restriction. Everything in the pink is kind of the 3-hour parking. You can see our site here to the north. In May of 2009, this is just the overnight line, just for clarification. And this is how we changed things in May of 2009. This is where we added the allowable overnight parking, okay, and then changed it from 2 to 7 a.m. restriction to a 3 to 6 a.m. It's hard to read, but that's what that is, 3 to 6 a.m. So we changed the hours, and we excluded this part of town, as well as a little bit here. And I think the primary reason that was done, as I recall, was the fact that that neighborhood was in flux, and it had been seeing some businesses leave, like Stookies. I think it closed at that point. And there were some other things happening in there where we just weren't seeing the level of commercial activity that really warranted the same heightened maintenance attention that we were seeing in the rest of the central business district. So the council at that time said, probably makes sense to go ahead and cut this out. So that was the action that was taken. We actually expanded a little bit to the south here where Gritman was doing their thing, and they've expanded, of course, over the years. And so seeing some need there to put those overnight restrictions and enhanced maintenance in that part of Main Street. So that's what was adopted in 2009. In July, this is the actual ordinance drawing. In 2013, so 4 years later, we looked at this again, and I've lost what we did. Okay, we'll move on. In 2016 was the last time we looked at this particular area, and the change that was made here was we added one more section of overnight allowed parking here at the request of the residents that were in this particular block. So that was the last change. Again, we're still outside with this particular block we're talking about now. So, current situation. This is the map that shows from 2009 that shows what we cut out back in 2009 from the overnight restriction. This is the aerial of that particular block. So this is the couplet, Main Street down to the couplet onto Jackson, heading southbound, Main Street here. This is Jackson and D, Rosars. What was Stookies now is the Hunga Dunga Brewery, the Recycle Center. We've got, I think, State Farm in here, the Rants and Raves Brewery here. We've got Culligan, Viral Science. There's some other businesses here and up in this area. The coffee shop drive-through here, Dutch Brothers. This is the parking lot triangle that the council approved renting to Rants and Raves a couple years ago. You'll remember that one coming through. So that's the area we're talking about. And the reason I'm pointing all these out is what we're seeing is kind of a resurgence of activity on the commercial front in this section of downtown. It's not in the central business district, but it is in the general business. And we are seeing more activity, more vehicular traffic, more congestion, and frankly, probably a need for a greater level of maintenance. That is what we typically do with the overnight restrictions. So that is the current boundary as of 2009 on the overnight restriction, and what's being proposed is this boundary change. This went to the Transportation Commission after we had received requests at staff level to look into the situation. We talked with Transportation. The boundary that was proposed by staff initially came along North Main and actually included all of D Street, so both sides, and then down the west side of Jackson back to the current boundary. What was discussed at Transportation, and I think was a very valid point, was one of the things that we addressed in '09 was the fact that there were bar patrons downtown and we didn't want them to drive. Well, now we have two breweries here, in essence, bar patrons that we don't want to drive if they're out in the evening and they need a place to park their car. And so the Transportation Commission recommended that we pull this boundary back and exclude the north side of D Street from the restriction. So that's what is before you this evening as the what would become the new boundary. That is the exhibit that the resolution would adopt if you choose to do so. So in summary, the idea here is to take the current boundary, extend it north, up Main Street, center of Main Street, highway, go westerly along the center of D Street, and then down the west side of Jackson back to the C Street intersection. That would mean both sides of Jackson would be restricted overnight parking, and the south side of D Street only would have restricted overnight parking. No effect on the highway because it's all no parking anyway, outright. So with that, I would hopefully answer any other questions that you might have.
I think you covered it pretty well from the last 35 years or so. Walter.
Thank you, Mayor. Last, from the documentation we've got in here, it appears that Ranson Raves is storing trucks and other vehicles along that east side of Jackson in front of their business, from the pictures we're given and the comments that are given to us. Is leaving the north side of D available for overnight parking going to move all those rigs over there?
Well, I believe, again, based on the applications for traffic revisions that we received that you're referring to in the packet, that was part of the reasoning for the requests from those business owners, was that they were seeing increased number of vehicles associated with Ranson Raves in the area, and
They were not being moved.
Not being moved, or if they were being moved, because we do have a 48-hour restriction, they're being moved across the street, they're being moved up and down a couple of spaces perhaps. But there were enough of them, and it was frequent enough that I think that spurred on some of those business owners to make the request. Would that problem go away with this proposal? I think it would go away from the perspective of where the most congestion is occurring and the most businesses that is occurring is happening, which is Jackson.
It would solve Jackson.
I think we solved that. Could those vehicles then just move to the north side of D Street? Yeah, I think they certainly could. And then it would be just a matter of the 48-hour restriction that's in place on all our streets.
Yeah, but the 48 hours is not enforced.
It's a challenging one to enforce, absolutely. So yes, it potentially could move those vehicles to the north side of D Street. I guess the positive of that is it would free up the parking where it's most needed and the most activity is occurring on Jackson. The downside is perhaps if we're losing some of that parking then that we wanted to have available for the breweries, for patrons to park their vehicles instead of driving, they'd be competing for those spaces.
Well, and if I may, Mr. Mayor, this is typical of what we found when we studied downtown parking in
7, 8, 9.
7, 8, and 9, that the business owners and employees park at the front door of their businesses and then complain that the customers cannot find a parking place. It's just amazing. I would vote to approve this, but I was wondering, is there some way we could put an asterisk on it that if the north side of D becomes a business storage parking lot, that we extend this to include that side and make it available for those patrons that need a place to leave their car overnight so they can get home with another ride or walk or call a cab. I mean, I think it solves the Jackson Street problem. I like it.
And if I may,
Oh, Gary, I see you raising your hand over there.
Yeah, certainly you can amend the ordinance or bring in, or excuse me, resolution
Resolution.
in the future. I would also note that these businesses are required to have a certain amount of parking in conjunction with their business in order to meet zoning requirements, something which is not required in the central business district. So the businesses that you're looking at here all have parking lots to accommodate the required zoning requirements. So the need isn't the same typically as it would be downtown, where there is almost no private parking lots available that are in conjunction with someone's business.
So, your point?
The point is that there is overnight parking available to the patrons of these businesses within the parking lots required as the zoning requirements.
Art,
So
did
the
you have a-
on-street parking overnight the need isn't the same as the need in the central business district.
You got
Yeah,
a-
my ear has been well chewed on this issue for some while, and I don't think would have come to this point were it not for continued less than neighborly behavior on the part of one company there. So given that we can always come back and modify the resolution later, if it turns out that the north side of D Street is becoming congested with parking for business vehicles, we can change it again. But as is, I think we should give this a go and approve it and see how it works out.
Are you making a motion?
I just have a question about the
Okay,
parking.
Kathy.
I just want a clarification. Ranson Reeves is renting the triangle space, right?
yeah, the city council approved a lease with the Ranson Rays Brewery for a portion of city property right here. It's east of the Jackson right-of-way and south of the A Street right-of-way the C Street right-of-way in here. So a little portion here that provides them, I think it's either 8 or 9 stalls right there. And that's what they needed to allow them to have the private parking that Gary's referring to as required in the
And
general
it's
business.
24 hours. It's not just for limited, it's not
Yeah,
just
it-
from like,
They
it's
they
just
can
their
park
time.
there, yeah,
Right.
it's their parking, and, I mean, the intent of parking is for business and for customer. How they choose to use it is certainly up to them.
Okay.
So I would like to make a motion to approve the resolution.
Okay.
Second? Jim got it.
Okay, I got a motion by Art and a second by Jim to approve the resolution. I'll start with John.
Aye.
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 Okay.
Mr. Mayor, one other item on this, please, if I may.
Okay, sure.
Les, in the letter from Culligan Water, in the third from last paragraph, the next to last sentence has a comment in it that I'd ask that we take a look at and inform Ms. Williams what the actual situation is. She talks about them illegally parking in that triangle, I think.
That's why I asked the question.
And so if we could look and see what she's really talking about and make sure she understands their leasing space.
We can do that.
Thank you.